My name is Nora Vance. I am 32 years old. I am standing in the atrium of the Hargrove Weld building on 4th Avenue in Seattle, holding a paper cup of coffee that has gone cold in my hand, watching my mother try to understand what she's looking at. She arrived 17 minutes ago, unannounced, in the way she has always arrived, as though the world rearranges itself around her schedule rather than her rearranging around anyone else's. She has been standing near the center of the lobby, turning slowly, taking in the glass-wrapped floors above her, the pale stone underfoot, the reception desk where the woman on duty stood up without being prompted when I walked through the main entrance this morning. She has been watching the people who slow when they pass me. A senior partner who has been practicing for 31 years. 2 associates I supervised on the largest transaction this firm has handled in 4 years. The building's operations director, who carries a radio and has, in 4 years, never once failed to say good morning to me before I say it to him. She does not understand the building. She does not understand the 243 people who work on the floors above us. She does not understand why the partner who manages 3 of our largest corporate accounts appeared at my office door at 7:45 this morning and said, without preamble, "The Hargrove file cleared. Good call on the endorsement." She has not understood me for 32 years. I stopped expecting her to a long time ago, but I want to tell you how we arrived here, because it did not begin in this atrium. It began 3 weeks before my sister Brooke's wedding, on a Sunday evening in October, when my mother called me at 8:43 at night and told me not to come. Before I go further, where are you watching from right now, and what time is it where you are? I want to see how far this story travels before the end. My mother's name is Sandra Vance. She is 61 years old. She is the most reasonable-sounding person in any room she has ever walked into, which is the thing that made it so difficult for so long. Cruelty, that sounds warm, is the hardest kind to name. By the time you understand what it is, you have already absorbed it. I am the older of 2 daughters. Brooke is 28. From the time we were young, there was a way my mother saw us that had nothing to do with who we actually were. Brooke was social, photogenic, easy in rooms, the particular kind of easy that photographs well and registers immediately with people who make fast assessments. I was quieter. I read. I preferred the kind of methodical thinking that takes years before it produces results that other people can see. My mother interpreted the difference as a verdict. There was never a single moment I can point to. It was the accumulation of small adjustments, a register of signals so consistent it became the ambient temperature of my childhood. When Brooke received the lead role in the school play at 11, my mother took the afternoon off work and drove 3 other mothers to the auditorium. When I won a state-level essay competition at 13, a juried competition with submissions from 42 schools, my mother said, "That's very impressive, sweetheart," and then asked if I'd started dinner. When I was 15, a teacher wrote on my report card, "Nora demonstrates exceptional analytical capability." I would strongly encourage her toward law or policy research. My mother read it at the kitchen table, set it down, and said, "Those are hard fields for women. Let's be realistic about what's practical." I said nothing. I folded the card and put it in the box under my bed, where I kept the things I was not willing to throw away and not willing to display. When Brooke was named homecoming queen at 17, my mother called relatives in 4 states. When I graduated from high school a full semester early, at 17 and a half, my mother said, "Oh, I didn't realize you were that close to done." The conversation lasted 3 minutes. She asked what was for dinner. The summer before I left for college, my aunt hosted a family gathering at her house on the water outside Tacoma. I was 18. I had just received my merit scholarship letter. I had, at that point, been accepted to 3 universities and had quietly chosen the best of the 3. None of this had been shared at the family table because I had learned by then the particular quality of the silence that followed when I shared things. My aunt asked my mother what my plans were. My mother said, "She's going to college. Probably something practical." Then she turned to Brooke and said, "Tell everyone about your internship." Brooke talked about the internship for the rest of the afternoon. I helped clear the dishes after. I said nothing. I watched the water. I attended the University of Washington on a partial merit scholarship. I did not mention the scholarship to my family. I had learned by then that achievements I named myself were received with a particular kind of polite warmth, the warmth of people trying to be gracious about something they had not anticipated and did not know where to put. Brooke's achievements, her social placement, her photographs, the marketing internship my mother arranged through a family friend, were announced at dinner, repeated to relatives, framed in the language of family pride. Mine were acknowledged briefly and moved past. I graduated with honors in 3.5 years. I called my mother the evening the acceptance letter arrived from the University of Washington School of Law. She said, "Law school. Is that what you want?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Well, your sister just got promoted. Did I tell you?" She had not told me. She told me then. For 11 minutes. We spoke for 12 minutes total. I want to be precise about what I do, because the precision matters here. I am a licensed real estate attorney in the state of Washington. I have been practicing for 6 years. I specialize in commercial property transactions, acquisitions, conveyances, title examination, due diligence review, and contract negotiation on commercial assets valued in the tens of millions. I work at Hargrove Weld, a mid-sized firm on 4th Avenue in Seattle that handles, among other matters, some of the largest commercial property transactions in the Pacific Northwest. I passed the bar on my first attempt at 26. I made associate at 27. I was promoted to senior associate at 29, ahead of the standard track at this firm by 14 months. In 6 years of practice, I have worked on transactions with a combined value in excess of $400 million. I have sat across from opposing counsel in conference rooms where the decisions made in the next 2 hours would determine whether a 200-employee company stayed in its building or did not. My mother knows I am a lawyer. She has known since I passed the bar and called her from the parking structure outside the testing center. Her response at the time was, "That's wonderful. So you'll be doing what exactly? House closings? Filing?" I said, "Commercial real estate transactions." She said, "Oh, like paperwork for businesses." I said, "Something like that?" I did not correct her. Corrections required energy I preferred to spend elsewhere. In the years that followed, I attended 2 Christmases, 1 Easter, and Brooke's engagement party. At each occasion, when relatives or family friends asked what I did, my mother answered before I could. "Nora does legal work. Contract stuff, very technical." At the engagement party, held at my parents' house in December, 2 years before the wedding, she told Brooke's future mother-in-law, a woman named Patricia Hollister, "Nora's always been the behind-the-scenes one. Brooke is more the face of things in our family." I was standing 4 feet away when she said it. I said nothing. I reached for a glass of sparkling water instead. What my mother did not know, what she had never once asked about, in 6 years of practice, was that 7 months before Brooke's wedding, I had been assigned as lead counsel on the Whitmore Group acquisition. The Whitmore Group was a commercial real estate holding company based in Bellevue. The acquisition involved 11 commercial properties across King and Snohomish counties. The transaction value was $312 million. It was the largest single transaction Hargrove Weld had handled in 4 years. It required 9 months of due diligence, 14 individual title reviews, 3 rounds of purchase price renegotiation, and more hours of contract revision than I have ever tallied, and do not intend to. The buyer in that transaction was a family-owned development company. The company was called Hollister Pacific. Hollister Pacific was owned and operated by a man named Gerald Hollister. Gerald Hollister was the father of the man my sister was about to marry. Let me sit here for a moment before I tell you what happened next, because this is the part one want you to understand. I had worked on Gerald Hollister's transaction for 7 months before I learned my sister was marrying his son. I learned it not from my family, they had not mentioned the Hollister name to me in any meaningful way, but from a title commitment document in February, when I saw the principal address of the Hollister Pacific operating entity and looked it up, and found a profile of the company, and found a photograph from an industry event, and recognized the face of the younger man standing beside Gerald Hollister as the man I had met once at Brooke's engagement party, briefly, in passing, as someone I was not introduced to by name. I did not call my family. I did not say anything to anyone at the firm. I went back to the title commitment and kept working.
I want you to hold that.
Because what comes next requires you to understand that I already knew, and I said nothing, and I kept doing the work. My phone rang at 8:43 on a Sunday evening, 3 weeks before the wedding. I was at my desk reviewing a title commitment for a transaction set to close on Thursday. The city below the window was the particular gray gold of Seattle in October. The coffee in my mug had gone cold 2 hours earlier. I had not noticed. I saw my mother's name on the screen. I set down my pen. I answered on the third ring. She asked how I was. She asked if I had been sleeping. She asked about the weather, which was identical in Seattle to what it was in Tacoma, 40 minutes south where my parents lived. Then she said, "Nora, I wanted to reach you before you made any plans. About the wedding." I waited. "We've been talking, your father and I, and honestly, Brooke mentioned it as well. We just think, given everything, it might be better if you sat this one out." I said, "Sat it out? We're not saying you're not welcome. That's not what this is. It's just that the Hollisters are very established, they know a lot of people, and this is Brooke's day. We don't want there to be any, you know how it is when people ask questions at events like this. They'll ask what you do, and then there's explaining, and it gets complicated. Brooke has been presenting things in a certain way." I said, "I see. It's not personal, sweetheart. It really isn't. You're doing fine, we know that, but fine, and what the Hollisters picture when they think about Brooke's family are different things. Your sister is worried. She didn't want to be the one to say it herself, but she's worried the fiancé's family will start asking questions about why her sister looks like she hasn't quite found her footing yet. It's just easier to manage expectations on both sides." 1 sentence of quiet. I said, "I understand." She exhaled. "I knew you would. You've always been the understanding one. We'll do a family dinner after, just us, and you can celebrate properly with us then." I said, "Okay." She said she loved me. I said the same. The call lasted 9 minutes and 40 seconds. I set the phone face down on my desk. I looked at the title commitment. The room was quiet except for the low hum of the building's HVAC, the only sound left in an office building after everyone else has gone home. I picked up my pen. I went back to work. That Monday morning I was at my desk at 6:12. The building was quiet. The cleaning crew had just finished the hallway. The conference room across from my office smelled of lemon oil, the kind that means someone had been told to make the room look important for a morning meeting. I poured coffee, sat down, and opened the Whitmore files. At 9:17, Gerald Hollister himself joined the scheduled call. This was unusual. He typically delegated legal detail to his outside counsel team. He joined because there was a title exception on the 7th property in the portfolio, a recorded access easement that appeared in the preliminary title report but had not been disclosed in the seller's representations. The exception required a decision, seek a title insurance endorsement, or renegotiate the purchase price allocation for that property to reflect the undisclosed defect. Gerald listened to my analysis. I laid out the options in order of cost, timeline impact, and long-term effect on the property's marketability. I recommended the endorsement. I told him the fee was $63,500 and that it would permanently eliminate the ambiguity in a way a price reduction could not, because a price reduction acknowledges the defect without resolving it, and the defect will resurface at every subsequent sale. He was quiet for 3 seconds. He said, "Do it." The call ended at 9:34. On the Friday before the wedding, my colleague Janet, a title officer who had worked alongside me on every stage of the Whitmore transaction, stopped by my desk at 4:47 in the afternoon. She set a folder on the desk without ceremony. Inside was a note from Gerald Hollister's office, handwritten on Hollister Pacific letterhead. It said that the company wished to extend an invitation to the transaction closing dinner in recognition of the exceptional counsel provided by Hargrove and Weld. The dinner was Saturday evening at the old.I venue in Capitol Hill. I read the address. I sat with it. The old.I was the same venue as Brooke's wedding reception. Same building. East Wing and West Wing. 14 blocks from where I had been told not to show up. I set the note on my desk. I read it once more. I thought about it for exactly as long as it deserved. Then I tucked it into the front pocket of my leather portfolio, The one worn soft at the corners, 3 gold initials still legible on the clasp, the one I have carried since my first year at Hargrove and Weld, because there are things you carry not because you need them, but because putting them down would mean admitting you were never going back. I RSVP'd yes. That Saturday morning I woke at 5:47. The city outside was still dark, the particular darkness that comes just before a November dawn when the clouds sit low and the streetlights catch them and the whole sky is the color of old bronze. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with the Whitmore closing documents spread before me, reviewing each one a final time. Not because they needed it, they had been reviewed 3 times already, but because the work deserved the full weight of my attention right up to the moment it was done. I thought about my mother's phone call once, briefly, and then I set it down. Not with bitterness. There is nothing useful in bitterness at 5:47 on a Saturday morning. I set it down the way you set down something that belongs to someone else, gently, in a place they can pick it up again later. I arranged for the final closing documents to be prepared and couriered to the venue. I selected the charcoal suit I keep for closings, the one my assistant described once as the suit that makes opposing counsel straighten up when you walk in. I did not tell anyone in my family. I did not call Brooke. I did not call my mother. I went to bed at a reasonable hour and got up the next morning and finished the week's remaining work. I arrived at the Aldecroft at 6:41 on Saturday evening. The West Wing was set for the closing dinner, long table, documents prepared, board members flown in from Portland. The East Wing was already audible through the glass corridor, the particular resonance of a reception in progress, music and voices, and the clink of glasses at distance. My colleague Janet met me in the lobby. She said, "Busy venue tonight." I said, "Apparently." We walked into the West Wing. Gerald Hollister was already there, standing near the window with Thomas Park, Hollister Pacific's outside counsel, who had been my counterpart on the transaction for 9 months, and 2 members of the Hollister Pacific board. When Gerald saw me cross the room, he came to meet me. He shook my hand with both of his. He said, "Nora, I've been telling my board about you for months. I want them to hear it directly." He introduced me to each board member. He used specific language, not our attorney, but the attorney who held this transaction together. He told the story of the easement exception. He said, "Most counsel on a transaction this size would have asked for a price reduction. It is the conservative play. It protects their file." She recommended the endorsement and explained why in 4 sentences. She was right about every sentence. She has been right every time I have needed her to be right for 9 months. The dinner ran 2 hours. The transaction formally closed at 8:15 p.m. when Thomas and I exchanged the final countersigned documents. Gerald shook my hand again. He told me that Hollister Pacific would be reaching out about the next phase of acquisitions in the new year. At 8:21 p.m., the glass doors from the corridor opened. Patricia Hollister had come from the East Wing. She had been managing guests for 3 hours and had stepped away. She saw her husband. She saw our group. She crossed the room toward Gerald, and he put his arm around her, and he said, "Patricia, this is Nora Vance, lead counsel on the Whitmore transaction, the attorney I have been talking about since February." Patricia Hollister looked at me. Something moved through her expression, a specific kind of recalibration. The look of a person who has just received information that directly contradicts something she was told by someone she trusted not long ago. She said, "Nora Vance. Are you Brooke's sister?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Your mother told us you were doing administrative work."
"Contracts," she said.
"Paperwork." I said, "I understand." She looked at Gerald. Gerald looked at me. 3 seconds of quiet in the room. He said, very carefully, "Brooke's sister." I nodded once. Then I turned back to Thomas and the documents. At 8:34, Marcus Hollister came through the glass doors with Brooke on his arm. They were looking for his parents. They found them standing in a circle that included me, Janet, Thomas Park, and 2 Hollister Pacific board members. Marcus crossed the room with the ease of a man who has just married well and feels the full weight of it pleasantly. He kissed his mother's cheek. He shook his father's hand. And then his father said, without raising his voice, "Marcus, do you know who Nora Vance is?" Marcus looked at me. He said, "Brooke's sister. We've met a couple of times." Gerald said, "She was lead counsel on the Whitmore transaction." Marcus went still. It was not a dramatic stillness. It was the stillness of a person doing arithmetic in real time, aligning two pieces of information that he had not previously understood belonged on the same table. He said, "The Whitmore transaction." Gerald said, "Yes." Marcus looked at Brooke. Brooke was looking at the floor. He turned back to me. He said slowly, "You worked on, my father's been talking about that deal for 9 months. He said the attorney on it was," he stopped. He reset. He said, "You closed the Whitmore deal." I said, "I was lead counsel." He said, "My father said the counsel on that transaction was the best he had worked with in 10 years. I said, "That's kind of him." He looked at Brooke again. Brooke still did not raise her eyes. "I want you to sit with what was in that corridor in those 30 seconds. Not what was spoken, but what was understood. The picture my mother had spent years building, the picture she had curated carefully enough to share with the Hollisters at the engagement party, in a room where I was standing 4 feet away, and the real thing, standing in the same room as the people she had tried to protect the picture from. Those gaps are not always visible. Sometimes they close quietly, over time, with no witness. Sometimes the room corrects itself all at once." My mother came through the glass doors at 8:39. She had been looking for Marcus and Patricia. She came in the way she always enters a room, confident, smiling already, body oriented toward the effect of her arrival. She saw my father standing just inside the door, hands folded, saying nothing. She saw Patricia, whose expression had not fully reset. She saw Marcus, who had gone quiet in a way that was new for him. She saw Brooke, who had still not looked up from the floor. Then she saw me. She went completely still. Patricia said, "Sandra, we've been getting to know Nora." My mother said, "Yes, I'm so glad she could stop by." Gerald Hollister said, "She was lead counsel on the Whitmore acquisition, Sandra. The commercial portfolio we closed tonight. The transaction we have been working on since February of this year." He said it without sharpness. He said it the way a man states a fact that has surprised him and that he has not yet finished arranging in his mind. "We flew 2 board members in from Portland for this closing. This transaction is the foundation of our next decade of development." My mother's smile did not leave. It shifted, the way a held expression shifts when the muscles behind it are no longer sure of their purpose. Patricia said, with the calibrated grace of a woman who has navigated 40 years of complicated rooms, "You must be so proud." My mother said, "We are, of course." My father, who had appeared behind her in the doorway and had taken in the scene with the expression of a man who does not yet fully understand what he is looking at but can feel its weight from across the room, said nothing. I set down my coffee cup. I picked up my portfolio. I said, "Congratulations again to Marcus and Brooke." I shook Gerald Hollister's hand. I shook Thomas Park's hand. I nodded to Patricia. I walked to the door. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at Brooke. I did not turn around. My phone rang at 7:02 on Monday morning. I was already at my desk. The building was not yet full. The HVAC was the only sound, the low hum that is the only sound left in an office before the day begins. It was my father. He said, "Nora." Just the name. The way a person says a name when they have understood something they cannot take back or unknow. I said, "Good morning." He said, "Your mother didn't know what you'd built, how far along you were." I said, "I know." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I've owed you an apology for a long time. I stood in those rooms and said nothing. For years. I'm sorry." I let the silence sit between us for a moment. I said, "Thank you for calling." The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. 3 days after the wedding, Brooke called. She apologized in the way people apologize when the situation has become uncomfortable enough that the apology is simply the path of least resistance, the apology that is about managing the present rather than accounting for the past. I noted the difference, without naming it. She said, "I didn't know what you were actually doing. Mom said you were just doing contract work. Filing." I said, I know. She said, why didn't you say anything? I said, no one asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Marcus wants to know if you'd be willing to talk to his father about future projects. I said, have Hollister Pacific reach out through Hargrove and Weld. She said, okay. I said, congratulations, Brooke. I mean it. She said she knew. I believed her. My father called again 10 days after the first call. This time the conversation was longer. He asked about the Whitmore transaction, genuinely asked, in the way people ask when they're trying to understand something they realize they should have understood a long time ago. I told him what the transaction was. I told him what lead counsel means. I told him, in plain terms, what 9 months of due diligence on a $312 million commercial property portfolio looks like from the inside.
He was quiet for a long time.
Then he said, I should have asked. Years ago. I should have asked. I said, yes. He said, I'm going to start. I said, I know. 2 weeks after the wedding, my mother came to Seattle. She arrived at my building on a Tuesday morning, unannounced, in the way she has always arrived. She sat across from me in the atrium for 40 minutes. She did not open with an apology. She opened with an explanation, an accounting that is also a form of revision, the version of events in which good intentions are the organizing principle. She said she had been trying to protect Brooke's day. She said she had not known. She said she had been trying to manage the situation. When she was finished, I said, I know you didn't know. That is the thing I want you to sit with. She said, what do you mean? I said, you didn't know because you never asked. In 6 years, you never once asked what a day at work looked like for me. You assumed and you built a picture from the assumption, and then you managed the world based on the picture. The picture was wrong. It has been wrong for a long time. I want you to think about what it means to spend 6 years deciding what someone is without once asking them. She was quiet. The woman at the reception desk answered a call. Somewhere above us, on the 4th floor, a door opened and closed. The building went on doing what buildings do. My mother said quietly, I thought I was being realistic. I said, I know. I stood up. I said, I'll call you this week. I walked her to the lobby door. The woman at the desk said goodbye. My mother glanced at her, then at me, then at the floors rising above us. She nodded once.
She left.
I went back upstairs. I poured fresh coffee. I sat down. I opened the next file. I've told you this story because I want to say 5 things, and I want to say them plainly. The first, setting a limit is not an attack. When I said understood and went back to my title commitment, I was not being cruel. I was recognizing that the best response to a false picture of you is not to argue with the picture. It is to continue being what you are until the room corrects itself. Choosing not to explain yourself, not to justify, not to perform smallness so that someone else stays comfortable is not cruelty. It is information. It tells the people around you, clearly, where respect begins. The second, you can love the people who dismissed you and still refuse to collapse back into the version of yourself they needed you to be. I love my mother. I called her that week as I said I would. But love is not a blank check. It never was. The version of me she constructed was a version she found manageable. I am not responsible for maintaining a fiction that kept her comfortable at the cost of my own reality. That is not love. That is a performance with no audience that benefits. The third, the people who chose to see you before anything was proven, before any room went quiet, before any transaction closed, are more your family than biology can guarantee. Janet, who set that invitation note on my desk without ceremony and with the complete confidence that I would know what to do with it. Thomas Park, who knew what my work was worth before any Hollister knew my name. These are the people who saw the actual shape of the thing. Biology is a fact. Belonging is a choice. Choose accordingly, and do not apologize for the choice. The fourth, leaving the people who have decided you are a supporting character in their story is not bitterness. I did not turn around when I walked out of that corridor. I did not give a speech. I picked up my portfolio, and I went to the door. That was not coldness. That was the only rational response to a room that had been organized around a false version of me for 32 years. You cannot grow in a room that was never built for you. You cannot become what you are in a space that has already decided what you are. At some point, you stop asking the room to change and you walk to a different one. The fifth, and this is the one I want to leave with you, the silence on the other side of all of this is not emptiness. The mornings where no one is ranking you, comparing you, deciding what you're worth. The mornings where the only sound is the HVAC and the coffee cooling and the file in front of you. That silence is not absence. That is what it was supposed to feel like all along. You are not made for the noise of other people's certainty about you. You were made for this. My colleague Janet said something to me the week after the wedding when I told her the outline of what had happened. She said, "People who need you to be small don't recover well from finding out you weren't." I wrote it down. I have not forgotten it. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you have been the one they counted out, if someone has looked at you across a table and decided what you are without once asking, I want you to know that the work you are doing in the quiet is real. It is building something. The room will correct itself. It always does. And the only question when it does is whether you will still be in it. My mother said I needed to find something practical. She was right about one thing. What is practical is rarely what she imagined it to be. The story you just heard was inspired by real experiences shared on public platforms including Reddit and other online communities. It has been thoughtfully adapted and reimagined for storytelling purposes. All characters, situations, names, and settings are fictional, altered, or generated using AI tools. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is entirely coincidental and unintentional. This story was created to deliver positive messages, emotional insight, and meaningful reflection, not to represent or defame any real person or situation. **